Kangaroo Studios, the AusBiz COB is the key stuff you need to know about the day in business and finance.
Welcome to the COB this Friday. We made it. What a week, what a roller coaster it has been as we continue to react to headlines about tariffs, the back and forth, the reciprocal tariffs being announced. It has been a huge week. But today we have seen some green on the screen. Let's catch up where the market is as we head into match off. Up 0.5% there on the CBO 200. Also seeing a gain of a similar amount on the ASX 200. It's up 43 points, 7,791. Also some optimism coming through here on the likelihood of the US avoiding a government shutdown. So that is starting to give some optimism into global markets as well. But just very nice, I think, to see the fact that we have managed to snap this 3-day losing streak. Let's get into the themes of the day. And of course, green on screen we just touched on, and metals matter because we did see major miners drive the market higher. We've got higher iron ore prices, we've got higher gold prices, a pretty good update coming through from Liontown as well. So encouraging to see the market come back out of that brief correction that we entered into yesterday. Also, rate decisions, some great decisions potentially being made next week. We've got the FOMC, we've got the Bank of England, we've got the Bank of Japan, all coming through with policy meetings. So it's going to be a very, very big week for global equity markets and of course traders. Let's get into some of the momentum that we saw in terms of the sectors today. And we mentioned the higher gold price. Newmont having a very solid session, up 5.4%. Evolution also had a gain of almost 5%, and Northern Star up by 3.7%. We were also quite closely watching the lithium players. This was after a broker upgrade on the overall sector. So PLS there was up 4.3%, and I should point out Liontown, of course, narrowing losses in the half year to December, gearing up to start underground production as well that stopped in the fourth quarter. Looking at some of the consumer discretionary stocks, also looking pretty good. JB Hi-Fi up by 1.2% there. When it comes to the news of the day, we did touch on Liontown Resources narrowing its first half losses. Losses hitting $22.6 million, less than just over 31 million posted in the prior year. Macquarie hiked its price target on South 32 to $4.50, so it's got about another dollar to rally there. Macquarie saying that South 32 benefits from not having just full exposure to iron ore, so that price hike driven by the aluminium and aluma price cuts being offset by some long-term copper and zinc price upgrades. Johns Lyng Group responded to an ASX query denying it disclosed earnings differed significantly from market expectations. Shares up by more than 1.5%. Myer refreshing its leadership team following its merger with Apparel Brands, and importantly, former David Jones CFO Kathy Karabatsis has been appointed Myer's Group Chief Financial Officer. Nothing like poaching from the competition. Myer up by 1.3%. And we just spoke to Cyclopharm CEO James McBrayer. They've secured a 5-year agreement with the US Veterans Health Administration to expand the adoption of their groundbreaking technology, Technogas, across the US. And really interesting point on that. Technogas has been in Australia since 1986, which, can you believe, is nearly 40 years ago. And it's only been in the US, well, it took about another 16 years to follow up from that momentum that we had seen in the US. All right, are we getting to our guest? Yes, we are. Welcome to the COB, Shane Oliver from AMP. Good to see you there, Shane. I read your piece. Thank you for giving me a sneak peek, as always. So we're talking here about the correction that we've seen in US markets, and you're saying, look, there could be some more volatility ahead.
That's right. I think what we're seeing at the moment is that markets have become very oversold and due for a bounce. You know, if you look at markets from a purely technical point of view, most indicators like an RSI, for example, would show the market to be oversold, both in the US and Australia. I thought maybe a couple of days ago we were starting to see a bit of a bounce, and then that failed because of Trump's ongoing news regarding tariffs. But it seems to me like we could have a bit of a bounce here. The US market had another fall yesterday, but is looking a little bit healthier on futures, partly because the risk of a shutdown which is another issue in the US. There was a risk of a shutdown if they don't pass a reconciliation bill, I think it's called. Not reconciliation, it's a funding bill basically that needs to get passed tonight in the US, and it looks like that'll pass. So that removes one minor risk, but obviously the tariff issue is still there and going to continue to escalate in the weeks ahead up until April at least. And that means it's way too early to say that we've seen the bottom here in markets, even though we may see a short-term bounce.
Yeah, indeed. Could be some more pain ahead. You talked there on what we're seeing with the US and, of course, the potential that it could avoid a shutdown, giving a boost to sentiment. But what a week, Shane. And did you have seeing the US president buying a red Tesla on the White House lawn on your 2025 bucket list?
Well, I certainly did, and I thought the guy hated electric vehicles, or that's certainly the impression he gave. But of course, Musk has become his mate, and he wants to help out his mate. So yeah, some have joked that it just proved that he's effectively a car salesman, you know, turning the White House lawns into a Tesla yard. I mean, on the one hand, I guess it's good to see that he's sensitive to the businesses that might be running into trouble, partly because of his own actions. But there is a broader issue here. Tesla has been at the forefront of it because Musk has been at the forefront of it. And global car buyers, I don't think they're of the far left. If you're buying a Tesla, you're not normally of the far left. But you might be someone who's concerned about the environment. You might be have above average earnings, and you think, well, this is a bit embarrassing. But what's happening here? So I can understand why Tesla sales have gone down for that reason. There's a few other things as well. The growth in electric vehicles has slowed down. There's a lot of cheap competitors, such as the BYDs, the Chinese electric vehicles. But there's no doubt there's a bit of a backlash here. And it highlights, I think, a broader issue that American companies face that I'm not a great supporter. I wouldn't support at all. Australia announcing retaliatory tariffs against the US. But you do sort of think twice about whether I should be buying US products. Not that I've got anything against the producers of those products, but it seems like America was one of our friends. Yeah, we have a trade deficit with them. They have a trade surplus with us. Our exports to the US aren't huge. Hard to argue that our aluminium, what do we export? $400 million worth of aluminium a year, according to that table. A year. Hard to argue that that could be killing the US aluminium market. It's around 2% of total aluminium imports into the US, and Peter Navarro said it's killing the market. The logic that comes out of the White House just defies any common sense, as far as I can see. So, and then you got this argument, oh, well, we and the rest of the world's been ripping America off. That just sounded a little bit paranoid to me, but in a broader sense, a lot of people around the world would sort of feel, we've been buying your phones, your technology, your culture as though swamped our own culture. I reckon many would sort of think, well, isn't it the other way around a little bit? You've been profiting at our expense. So once you start raising these issues, as Trump has done, then people around the world start to think twice. I get a little bit worried. I go into Woolworths now, and around this time of year, I don't think it's the right time for Australian oranges. Stand to be corrected here. Last I looked, they were oranges from America, probably California somewhere, and I'm starting to think, well, what happens if our oranges are out of season? Whose oranges can I buy? We can't buy the American ones. So these sort of things, this sort of thinking starts to creep in, Bundy rather than whiskey from the US as well. So it's a problem. These guys are our friends globally, our best friends, and you get treated like this, and I don't see any good reason for it. So it is going to have ramifications, and the risk is that it shows up in reduced sales and backlash against American companies. And interestingly, someone in Tesla pointed that out to Trump. Obviously, Musk didn't think of it. It's a bit too late now, but someone in Tesla wrote a letter to Trump explaining that there is a risk of a backlash here, and maybe turned out Tesla was at the forefront of that.
Yeah. What does all this do for the overall, I know we've touched on inflation, trade wars and the like, but the global policy rate picture as well? I mentioned that next week we've got the Fed, we've got the Bank of England, Bank of Japan, and of course we have Bank of Canada this week.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy week for central banks. So I think you've got the Swiss central bank in there and the Swedish one as well. It's going to be fairly busy. My take is that central banks are still in the process of cutting rates. Just look at that graph there. Canada, the latest one last week, ECB. That chart there starts from the date of first hike a year ago, so that's why they're not all aligned at the end. But the trend is unmistakable. It's down. We're not that different from many other countries in that graph there, and I think we will ultimately follow the same trend, and that will continue. Good US inflation numbers in the last week. Maybe not as good when it translates to the core PCE, but still reasonably good numbers. So that's good sign. But I think if you're thinking about the US, yes, the tariffs there could add to inflation because it's America imposing the tariffs. It's ambiguous in Australia and some other countries because the levels of tariffs they put on won't quite match those in the US. The US is putting on. And secondly, in Australia, I don't think we're going to be putting in any tariffs on US products, according to the Prime Minister, and rightly so. But therefore, the threat to inflation here and in other countries is far less. It's more of a dampener on economic growth. And therefore, you could argue that the tariffs actually add to the case for rate cuts. But just looking at the central banks over the week ahead, Fed's going to leave rates on hold. The Bank of England probably the same. The Swedes will probably leave rates on hold. The Swiss will probably cut. And the BOJ will probably leave rates on hold. So most of them over the week ahead, I think, will be on hold. But the broad trend, I think, still remains down.
Excuse me, you touched before, Shane, on the orange situation. I wanted to ask you, have you been able to find eggs anywhere?
Well, I must go to... it always depends on which suburb. So I'm not going to do an ad here for any one supermarket. If I was in another suburb, I might go to Coles or Aldi. But in the suburb I live in, there's just a Woolworths. And I must go there the wrong time because whenever I go there, it says, one dozen eggs per customer or something like that, some limit. But there's none there anyway. They're simply not there. My wife managed to find some at a corner store, one down the road. Little store. I think she had to pay $10 for them or something. So that's okay. But whenever I've gone to Woolworths, they've not been there. I think what happens is that people know when the trucks come. Usually the big Woolworths truck comes on a Friday night and stocks the place up. And then they rush in on Saturday mornings or something to get the eggs off the shelf. And I'm too late. But it's an ongoing issue. Interestingly, it's also an issue in the US. Egg prices in the US have surged. I think they're running about $6 a dozen. The $10 I paid was at a corner store, so they always charge a big markup. But a problem in both countries all comes back to avian flu. So it's not the egg producers trying to rip us off, or Joe Biden or Albo. It's avian flu which did it, but different strains in the two countries. But just shows what problems these issues can cause. 5 years ago it was toilet paper. Now it's eggs.
Exactly. That's the exact same thought I had. And, when I was living in Singapore, we used to have a big sticker put on our toilet paper. You're only allowed one packet, and that said you'd paid for it because people were stealing toilet paper. Anyway, cracking disaster, pardon the pun, what's happening with the egg shortage. Shane, I hope you've got some for the weekend to have a bacon and egg roll. Have a great weekend.
I have got, we've still got half a dozen left, so hopefully that'll see us through. I mean, what will happen is that they'll rebuild their flocks, and then the new chickens will start laying eggs, and we'll get back to normal. But it takes a while before that can happen.
Yeah, let's hope. That will be excellent. All right, Shane, have a good weekend.
Will be.
See you next week.
Okay, you too. See ya.
All right, let's get back to the equity market. The stock of the day was Liontown Resources. Richard Hemming from Under the Radar Report and Luke Winchester from Merewether Capital joined Andrew.
Yes, the dynamics, the supply dynamics still remain in place. It's just that supply is shrinking. So when the market does turn, like this sort of stock will be in a great position. Like we call this stock Liontown like a kind of mini version of Pilbara Minerals because it's got similar kind of production dynamics.
What's made it so tough for these businesses is potentially China being an irrational competitor. You read stories about Chinese production, potentially being below cost and subsidised by the government, subsidised by their battery manufacturers. That sort of activity makes it very hard for any companies, in the Western worlds to compete, without that sort of price response. The result today was, it was ugly. It's sort of still ramping up. So you still got a lot of costs from bringing your production online. Obviously, the price is probably still below where they need it to be.
All right, an update today. So let's have a look at some of the leaders that helped get us there, including A2 Milk, which had a near 8% gain. Liontown Resources, of course, on its upgrade. Westgold and Bellevue also helping things along, as we saw quite a lot of movement into gold players. On the downside today was Car Group, but remember that it did go ex-div. Premier Investments as well, maybe potentially a little bit of a loss there on the news from Maya. In the small end of town, we saw Metals X have a very good session. Race Oncology, we spoke to them. That CEO interview will be up shortly. They had a very positive update, sending shares up by 21%. To the downside, though, in the small end of town, including these stocks, gosh, cash converters. Haven't heard of cash converters in a long time. Remember when you used to go and sell your stuff for cash? Hutchison down by 8.3%. All right, what is happening tonight? The University of Michigan consumer sentiment in the US and University of Michigan inflation expectations as well. As Shane told us, next week, a lot happening in terms of the overall decisions from the Bank of England, from the Fed, from the Bank of Japan. We also get retail sales, a couple of stocks trading ex-dividend, including Hub24 and Ramelius. And of course, the arrival and departure figures, which are always quite interesting, coming through on Tuesday as well, giving us a bit of an indication on the overall migration figures. Let's have a look at where the market has finished, up 0.5% there on the CBO 200, and I'll just get your read as well on where the ASX 200 has finished the trading week. 40 points, 0.5%, 7,789. So certainly that correction was very short-lived, but could be more pain ahead, as a number of our guests have told us. And over the last week, the ASX 200 down 2%. That does it for the COB and for AusBiz this Friday. We'll be back bright and early on Monday. Have a great and safe weekend. We'll see you then.